the Center for Civil Rights History and Research takes a moment to honor the veterans who fought for freedom, justice, and equality. From Revolutionary War patriots to the U.S. colored troops in the Civil War, to the men of bronze in World War I, to the Tuskegee Airmen and veterans of World War II, who fought fascism abroad and racial injustice at home. African American soldiers have defended their country and demanded their rights as citizens. Today, we honor them. We particularly want to recognize two veterans with connections to Columbia, Robert Greene and Charles Person. In 1953, 18-year-old Army Private Robert Greene was stationed at Fort Jackson as he completed basic training. On Thanksgiving night, he and 49 other African-American soldiers boarded a bus at the Taylor Street USO. One of them sat down next to a white woman. When the driver told him to move and he refused, the driver called the police, who arrested every one of the 50 African-American soldiers on the bus. The city jailed the soldiers overnight and fined them, all without legal representation. This injustice drew the attention of the South Carolina NAACP, which in turn drew national attention to the case, appealing to President Dwight D. Eisenhower and the United States Army. In response to the protest, Fort Jackson and the City of Columbia agreed to stop prosecuting soldiers who challenged segregation laws. Mr. Greene completed his Army airborne infantry training at Fort Bragg, North Carolina, and Fort Lee, Virginia. After leaving the service, Mr. Greene attended Alabama State University, where he met his wife. Later, the couple moved to Atlanta, where he retired after a long career with the United States Postal Service. Today, we also recognize Charles Person, a participant in the 1961 Freedom Rides. In the spring of that year, in a campaign organized by the Congress of Racial Equality, 13 men and women, Black and white, departed from Washington, D.C. on what they called a freedom ride. Their goal was to challenge segregation on interstate buses, recently ruled unconstitutional by the United States Supreme Court. As an 18-year-old college student from Atlanta, Charles Person joined the first freedom ride as the youngest member of that cohort. During the trip, he was among the riders who traveled through Columbia, stopping at the Trailways bus depot. Later in Birmingham, Alabama, Mr. Person and traveling partner Jim Peck were severely beaten by a mob when they attempted to enter a whites-only waiting room. Subsequent rides continued throughout 1961, prompting the Kennedy administration to issue regulations enforcing desegregation in interstate travel facilities. An accomplished student, Mr. Person served in the U.S. Marines for 20 years, earning decorations for his tour of service in Vietnam. He now resides with his wife in Atlanta, and his memoir, The Buses Are Coming, will be released in April of 2021. Recently, we were honored to participate in a program in which Mayor Steve Benjamin of Columbia recognized and saluted Mr. Greene and Mr. Person with keys to the city. So, Mr. Mayor, we thought we knew a lot about events in Columbia, and these two gentlemen are here today to remind us there's much more to be told and to uncover. One of the stories that matters for us is an event that occurred on Thanksgiving Day, November the 26th, 1953, when 51 African-American soldiers from Fort Jackson had concluded the days of activity on Thanksgiving. They were boarding a bus back to Fort Jackson, and one of the soldiers sits next to a young white woman. And that actual act leads to a critical chapter in the history of our city that many of us had no idea about. Now, what's amazing today as we honor Mr. Robert Greene is that this was a story that had come to our attention when we began the Columbia 63 project. But in April of 2019, about 5:01 p.m. in the afternoon, I got an email from Dr. Henri Monteith Treadwell, telling me that there was an incident that she wanted us to research. She said that she believed there were some soldiers from Fort Jackson who had been arrested and who were charged $25 by the city of Columbia. And she said that she wanted to know if there was any evidence we had about this incident. And there was a friend of hers named Robert Green, who was one of the 51. In 30 minutes, I wrote her back saying, here is an article about what happened in November of '53. She gives that article to Mr. Green. And I told her at the time, we are always curious if any of those persons were still with us. And so Christopher Freer, who's on the call today, he followed up on this lead. He contacted the Columbia municipal courts. They went through their dockets. They found the dockets of all these men who were arrested. And Chris, what number is Mr. Green?
What?
He's number 22.
So number 22 on that list was an 18-year-old named Robert Green. Now, it never occurred to us that we would ever one day have a chance to meet or hear from Robert Green. So, Mr. Mayor, I'm very pleased to introduce to you number 22 on the arrest list, Robert Green. So, Mr. Mayor, we'll turn to you for some comments and reflections about this historic figure.
No, it's you know, we get blamed for a lot of things in the city in 2020, particularly about the fact that we're relentless about collection of fines and tickets and the like. And I think maybe that very same spirit extends back a half a century. So I thank God we still had these records in the archives. I think they wanted to get that $25.50, Mr. Green. That's why they never got rid of the records. It's amazing. In the I guess just over 100 years at Fort Jackson has been a central part of Columbia's history. Just the different stories and inflection points that some that we know about, and most that we don't know about. That really speaks to the incredible dualness of America. That men and women, but primarily men, that in some of the nation's most challenging times after the defeat of Nazism and fascism and fighting more and more wars abroad and in the Pacific Theater, that even those of you who are willing to step up and put your lives on the line in defense of a country that would not defend you, it speaks to the character of what Dr. Donaldson and I have been endeavoring, as he mentioned, for the last decade, to highlight is just the story, the true story of the African seed and the American son. So it's an honor to be here. When I think about men like you and Mr. Person, I know that the reality is that the positions that we all enjoy, but particularly Dr. Donaldson and I, we're doing it because we're standing on the shoulders of folks like you, Mr. Pearson, Mr. Person, Dr. Treadwell, and others, and that's what has really fueled us, recognizing that we're kind of that link in the bridge that connects our past to hopefully a prosperous and more just future. So we thank you for your sacrifice. We thank you for telling your story. It's amazing how those small conversations over coffee, over a glass of wine, whatever it happens to be, how when you put it in the hands of Bobby and Chris and others, how it edifies an entire community, and that's what we're here to recognize today. And I've never done this virtually before, so Bobby, I don't know about process exactly how this ought to flow if we do them together. If I can,
we'll present Mr. Green his, and then we'll introduce you to Mr. Person.
So I think every day, Mr. Green, they attempt to erode my power here in Columbia, but I do keep singular authority over the presentation of our city's highest honor, and it really is my pleasure and my honor. And you both will receive yours, I think by Monday at the latest. The key to the city of Columbia. This is our highest honor, and my only regret is that I wasn't there to shake your hand and give it to you in person. And hopefully, God willing, we'll be able to recognize you in person sometime in the not too distant future.
Okay, all right. So Mr. Green, we would like to open the floor for you for any comments you wish to extend. I imagine that when you were arrested as an 18-year-old, I don't think you ever thought you'd be welcomed back to Columbia, and certainly not welcomed back by the first African-American mayor in the city.
Thank you. That was like you said, that was like 67 years ago. And it never crossed my mind that it would even be thought of again. It only happened because it was related in the my bridge world, for doing research about Negro history. And I have to mention to her that about my accident, but she couldn't find it. And by accident, I asked Dr. Heron, I mentioned it to Dr. Heron because she was from Columbia. And she was one of the first Black to attend the University of South Carolina. And it was amazing to me that the very next day she rushed in with papers, handed me papers about the incident. And that was quick. And she was really excited that I was a part of that unit. It wasn't a unit, it was just a mixture of Blacks from all over the country that was arrested that night. And I really appreciate your gift, sir.
It's our honor, sir. It's our honor. Thank you.
And Mr. Mayor, just so you know, it's also historic. 60 years ago, Mr. Green was taught how to play bridge. He joined a bridge club in Alabama, and a member of his bridge club in Atlanta is Dr. Henri Monteith Treadwell. So playing bridge, they discussed this moment of history. And so here we are today. It's amazing how small the world is.
Very much so, very much.
Wow. Mr. Mayor, our next veteran to honor today is Mr. Charles Person. When the original Freedom Rides began, Mr. Person was the youngest in that cohort. Their travels brought them from Washington, D.C. down the Atlantic seaboard. They ended up in Charlotte, then Rock Hill, and then before going to Sumter, they stopped in Columbia at the Trailways bus station. When they arrived in Columbia, they were only here for a few short hours. There was no incident that occurred. However, there were several photographs taken of Mr. Person and others at the Trailway bus station. Those photographs remain in negative form, buried in the vault of the state newspaper. We saw them when Columbia 63 first began. We had no idea who they were. And ultimately, as a result of the tool of Facebook, we were able to connect a photograph of a young Charles Person to Charles Person in Atlanta. He goes on from South Carolina, goes through Alabama, is severely beaten in Alabama as a result of being among those Freedom Riders. Later, he has a very distinguished career in the military. He serves for over 20 years. Today, he resides in Atlanta, and next spring, he will be issuing his own memoir chronicling his life story in the civil rights movement. So we're very honored today to introduce to you this young 18-year-old who stopped in Columbia, who dared to believe change was possible, and who literally shed blood to move this nation forward. So we're very honored today to introduce to you, Mr. Charles Person of Atlanta, Georgia.
Well, thank you so much again, Dr. Dollison, Mr. Person. Thank you for your sacrifices. You know, we often speak to considering the times in which we live, you know, the greatest pandemic since 1918, the greatest economic disruption, certainly an election year since 1932, or maybe Dr. Dollison might say 1876, and the greatest social unrest around racial injustice since 1968. So we spent an even greater amount of time this year talking to young people about about those who came before us and helping them really understand. I mean, I got to the University of South Carolina quarter century after Dr. Monteith Treadwell matriculated there on September 11, 1963. And I remember being involved in civil rights, and we were, at that time we were pushing to end apartheid in South Africa, as if America had figured everything out at that time, and that was when I became a student of history, and I decided to learn and read, but I will tell you that the last the last 10 years or so, working on this effort with Dr. Donaldson has given us an effort to humanize this history in a way. I mean, this using old school research, literally digging in hidden archives that folks haven't, I won't say haven't seen for decades, but some people have never seen, and then combining it with this incredible information superhighway, using all the tools and technology of Facebook, and being able to tap into the most valuable tool that we have, which I believe is experience. Young people are smart, they're dynamic, they're everything else, but nothing teaches lessons, nothing teaches character, nothing teaches like the value of experience. And the experience that you all had as freedom riders, and then obviously both as men who serve your country and continuing to serve your country, is just something that can't be replicated. It can't be replicated, and we're so thankful that you're indeed taking the time to reduce your thoughts and your emotions and your experiences to writing, so that they're indeed preserved for generations yet to come, long after we've all gone on to glory. So, in contribution in respect and thanks to your contributions to the not only the people of Colombia, people across the Deep South, people across America, and certainly those of us who believe that this country still remains the world's best hope, to making sure that every one of God's children has the dignity that they ought to be afforded. I also take great pleasure in awarding to you on behalf of the people of Colombia our highest honor, the key to the city of Columbia. And I do look forward to the opportunity again to shake that hand and look you in the eye and just utter the two most powerful words I believe in the English language, which are just thank you. Thank you.
So Mr. Pearson, we'll be glad to hear some remarks from you as well.
Well, thanks for this award. It means an awful lot to me, especially as we approach the 60th anniversary of the Freedom Rides. Now that original group that left Washington, D.C., there's only two of us remaining. So it has a very special meaning. But I think those times that we spent in all the cities throughout the Upper South and in the Deep South will always, because not so much of what we did, but all the wonderful people we met along the way who assisted us in lodging and food and just good friendship. So for that, I'm eternally grateful. And I'm sure that my colleagues feel the same. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. And Dr. Donaldson, to your colleagues and entire team on the line, just thank y'all. This is incredibly meaningful in so many ways, to be able to recognize these two pioneers who represent a much larger, almost infinite group of people of all races, ethnicities, shapes, and sizes, just all who are trying very hard, who have for decades, to speak to the better angels of this great country. Thank you.
Well, Mr. Green and Mr. Person, I want to thank you on behalf of the City of Columbia, the University of South Carolina Center for Civil Rights History, and Columbia 63 Our Story Matters for being here today. And Mr. Mayor is right that for those of us who are that coming generation, to sit in your presence and to hear these stories today is powerful. and also inspirational. There are 8 years that separate these two bus incidents in Columbia between 1953 and 1961. And we've chronicled many other important bus incidents in Columbia, including one in 1954 of a young woman in Columbia who sits down on a city bus, who challenges segregation, who files a lawsuit against the owners of the bus company, whose lawsuit becomes an important precedent for the case of Rosa Parks in Montgomery, Alabama. In 1953, Mr. Green, when you all were arrested, it became a story around the country. It was not one very much embraced in Columbia, but it was told elsewhere. And in 1953, Mr. Mayor, his roots are in South Carolina, but he's from New York. And in 1953, the NAACP in Queens, New York, writes a letter that says the following: "These soldiers," meaning from World War II, "died believing in the democracy for which they fought. The city of Columbia, South Carolina, has made a mockery of the supreme sacrifices of these American heroes. We protest the action of the city of Columbia, South Carolina, and its so-called law enforcement agency, and we strongly urge you to use the facilities of your office in taking steps to correct this injustice." This was a letter written by an NAACP chapter in New York to the President of the United States, Dwight D. Eisenhower. We want you to use your office to correct this injustice. Well, President Eisenhower did not do that, but we're fortunate today in 2020 that the city of Columbia and our mayor is using their office to correct this injustice. And a part of that correction is for us to tell the history, to document the history, and to make sure that coming generations are informed of that history. So we're grateful, the two of you, for bearing witness to what you lived and experienced so that we're now able to tell that story to the broader public. So thank you for being with us today, and thank you for your critical role in our history.
Good evening. My name is Constance Cadell. I am the Graduate Assistant and Archivist at the Center for Civil Rights History and Research. We seek to share, preserve, and document the stories of the Civil Rights Movement in South Carolina, including the crucial stories of our veterans and their work. It was an honor to share the stories of Mr. Green and Mr. Persons today. If you have additional stories, documents, or photographs about civil rights in South Carolina, please feel free to reach out to us because we want to hear about them. You can reach out to us at sccivilrights@sc.edu. That's sccivilrights@sc.edu. Thank you.